Hello everyone and welcome to Music 143. My name is Megan and I'm going to be the instructor for the course. So one thing I really like to do is to make these sort of short videos addressing some of the more complicated issues that you're going to be coming across in your readings. Some of the ones that I find students get the most hung up on are meter classification, syncopation, and texture. And so what I wanted to do is just give a really brief introduction to those terms and touch on a few examples where you're going to hear some differences. So just to get into it, let's listen to a little bit of Grapevine Fires. The first thing I'd like to touch on is this issue of meter classifications. These are simple meters, that is meters where the beat divides by 2, compound meters where the beat divides by 3, and complex meters where the beat can divide alternately by 2s and 3s or other numbers. Alright? So what I'd like you to do when I'm playing this example is first to try and establish the pulse. You can do that by tapping your foot, snapping your fingers, something like that. Once you know where that is, see if you can ask yourself, does it make more sense for this to be kind of counted as 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and something dividing into 2 groups, or 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 dividing into 3 groups. So here it is. More sense to count that as 2 or 3. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and, or 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Listen to the snare part. Alright, so that's pretty short and sweet, but I hope you guys can hear that it actually makes a lot more sense to be counting that in groups of 3, the beat dividing into groups of 3. So that's an example of a compound meter. Alright, another issue that I find students get hung up on at times is this idea of syncopation. So that song was actually assigned your syncopation example, but I think this song by Bob Marley, One Love, is a much clearer example of that concept. What syncopation means is melodic events are happening oftentimes or all the time on offbeats. They're happening in between where the pulse is regularly falling. So again, the first thing I'd like you to do when you're listening to this example is see if you can establish the pulse for yourself, snapping and clapping. And then focus in on Bob Marley. He's going to be the guy singing sort of above the chorus. And see if you can figure out, are the things that he's saying or the events that are happening in his part happening on that pulse, or are they happening off the pulse? You're going to find that they're happening off the pulse as an example of syncopation. So here it is. So that's an example of syncopation. The last issue that I wanted to touch on just really briefly is this idea of texture. So texture is something that I often find students struggle with when they're going to write their own essays. A lot of times maybe the biggest issue is use of the term monophony. So what monophony means is that there really is only one thing going on and it's something melodic. Alright? And so if you hear something like this, just one note at a time and nothing else is going on, that's monophony. If you're hearing something like that, where there's something, there's two things going on and maybe one is more interesting than the other one, but there is something else happening, then what you're hearing is homophony, and that's what you're going to be hearing most of the time in rock and pop music. On rare occasions, though, you will hear monophony, just a single note at a time happening in some sort of melodic line, or polyphony, where there are multiple independent lines happening simultaneously. So one of the best examples of that is Simon and Garfunkel's Scarborough Fair. What you're going to hear in this example is actually the two of them, Simon and Garfunkel, are each singing independent melody lines. Sometimes they're singing together, but different melodies. And sometimes they're sort of trading off, and so their voices are interweaving, but they're both equally important lines, so that's polyphony. So here's that example. Doing totally different things. Hey, alright, so that's it. Like, there's just really not time to kind of touch on all of those terms, but if you have questions about other terms or something else that you came across in this week's reading was unclear to you, I hope you'll feel free to contact me, and you can look forward to these videos touching on other issues, concepts, studio recording techniques, this kind of thing, over the course of the semester. So thanks for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this week's reading.